Hey there and welcome to MurderTube. Today we have yet another requested case, and this is a non-stop rollercoaster of depraved and horrific behaviour from start to finish. This is the case of an Australian lady by the name of Katherine Knight. Katherine's mother, Barbara, left her husband for the man that she was having an affair with, Ken Knight. They had 2 children together at first, and then on the 24th of October 1955, they had twin girls. One of these girls was Katherine. Ken was an abusive alcoholic, and he ruled his household with intimidation and abuse. He was also sexually abusive to his very own wife, sometimes sexually abusing her up to 10 times per day. This caused Barbara to vent her frustration to her young girls. She would tell her young daughters about the intimate details of her sex life, as well as how much she hated sex and hated men. Katherine herself was also sexually abused as a young child until the age of around 11. She was sexually abused by some of her own family members, however it was actually not her dad. The family moved to Aberdeen and Katherine began to attend Muswellbrook High School for a short time. On the good days, Katherine was a model student and received awards for good behavior. Katherine unfortunately had a lot of bad days, and on those days she was a loner and a bully. On one occasion, she tried to attack a student with a weapon and also injured a teacher. Katherine was just 15 years old when she left school, and she was still illiterate at the time. She could not read or write properly. It didn't take long though until Katherine obtained a job at a slaughterhouse, and she loved this job. She maybe loved the job a little bit too much though. She was given her own set of butcher's knives, and wherever she lived throughout her life, she kept these butcher knives above her bed, so that they would always be handy if I needed them. In 1973, she began dating David Stanford Collette. David was an alcoholic, but he was a good man. It was the following year when the two got married, and this is where Katherine's own mother, Barbara, gave a warning to David. The old girl said to me, "Watch out. You better watch this one or she'll fucking kill you. Stir her up the wrong way or do the wrong thing and you're fucked. Don't ever think of playing up on her, she'll fucking kill you." And that was her mother talking. She told me she's got something loose. She's got a screw loose somewhere. During the wedding night, the couple had sex 3 times, and then David fell asleep. Katherine was not satisfied with this, and was not very happy that her new husband had fallen asleep, so she did what everyone decides to do. She tried to strangle her new husband. The relationship, of course, was a violent and abusive relationship, with all of this abuse coming from Katherine. On one occasion, David was late home, as he was in a darts competition. He made it through to the final round, which is what caused him to be late home. A heavily pregnant Katherine burned all of his clothes and his shoes, and when David finally did return home, she hit him in the head with a frying pan. The police of course wanted to charge Katherine, but by this point she was very apologetic, and David decided not to press charges against her. In 1976, just after the birth of their first child, David had enough of the abuse and he moved away to be with a new girlfriend. Katherine retaliated by placing her 2-month-old baby on the local train tracks and leaving it to the fate of an upcoming train. She then stole an axe from a nearby yard, went back to the town, and began threatening to murder people. Katherine was arrested and submitted to a hospital, but the very next day, she signed herself out and was free again. Luckily, minutes before a train arrived, a local vagrant spotted the baby on the tracks and rescued it. This, however, was not reported to the police at the time, so Katherine was never charged with it, and the baby was also returned to Katherine's care. And then just a few days later, Katherine used a knife to slash the face of a lady and forced her to drive her to Queensland. On the way there, they stopped at a service station and this lady was able to flee and call the police. By the time the police arrived, Katherine had a young boy hostage at knife point. The police were able to rescue the boy and disarm Katherine using some brooms that were nearby. Katherine was once again submitted to hospital. In the hospital, Katherine confessed that she planned to kill the mechanic that had repaired David's car, allowing him to drive to a different town. And then she was also going to continue to Queensland and kill David and his mother. So the police alerted David of Katherine's plan, and then David did something that no one should do. He left his girlfriend and went with his mother back to Aberdeen so that he could look after this abusive, potential murderous wife of his. Later that year, Katherine was released into her mother-in-law's care, and she and David continued their abusive relationship. In 1983, after the birth of their second child, Katherine actually left David. She continued to work in a slaughterhouse for some time until she suffered a back injury and was placed on disabilities. In 1986, she met and began dating David Sanders. David was a good man, and of course Katherine was abusive and violent to him. David moved into Katherine's home along with her 2 children. He also had a 2-month-old dingo puppy. Katherine slit the throat of the 2-month-old puppy as a warning to David that this is what will happen to you if you ever cheat on me. That wasn't enough for Katherine. She also hit David in the head with a frying pan, knocking him unconscious. Despite this, David stayed with Katherine, and in 1988 they had their first child together. Shortly after this, Katherine hit David in the face with an iron, burning part of his face and stabbing him in the stomach. David had enough of the abuse and was terrified, so he went into hiding. Katherine tried to find him, although none of his friends would confess to knowing where he was. Several months later, David returned in the hopes of seeing his child, and he learned that Katherine had gone to the police saying she was terrified of him and obtained an apprehended violence order against him, which is basically a restraining order. Years later, Katherine had her 4th child with a man named John Chillingsworth. This relationship only lasted a few years, and then Katherine left him for the man that she had been having an affair with, John Price. John Charles Thomas Price was a divorced father of 3 children, 2 of which lived with him. He had spent the past 17 years working in a local mine, and he made good money from it. He was described as a terrific bloke who would give his left arm to help anyone out. He knew of Katherine's violent past, but their relationship started off rather well, and his own kids liked Katherine as well. In 1998, they got into an argument. John was refusing to marry Katherine, and she was not happy about this. So after that argument, she decided to record some items that he had stolen from work and send the videotape to John's boss. Now these items were some expired medical kits that the company had thrown into the garbage, and John had salvaged them from the garbage and taken them home. Despite this, John was fired from his long-time job. He was understandably very annoyed, and he kicked Katherine out of the house. Unfortunately, just a few months later, the two began their relationship again. By February of 2000, John had been assaulted numerous times from Katherine, and now he was also stabbed in the chest. So on February 29th, 2000, he obtained his own restraining order against her. That same day, he told some of his co-workers that if he was not in work the following day, it was because she had murdered him. The co-workers of course begged John not to go home, but he was worried that if he didn't, Katherine may hurt or murder his own children. So he returned home, and Katherine was not there. His kids were going to be staying at a friend's house for a sleepover, so the house was empty. John spent the evening at his neighbor's house and returned home around 11 p.m. to go to sleep. Katherine was still not in the house. The following day, John was not at work. His co-workers panicked when he didn't show up, and his neighbor panicked when he saw John's vehicle still in the driveway that he had not left for work. A neighbor and a co-worker both knocked at John's house, and when they saw blood on a door frame, they immediately called the police. One of the investigators, Detective Senior Constable Peter Myuu, described in his report some of the horrors he witnessed inside the house. Once inside the kitchen, I saw a large section of what appeared to be human skin hanging from the top architrave of the doorway leading into the lounge room. The piece of skin extended from the top of the doorway right to the floor and appeared to be an entire human skin. Looking through this doorway into the lounge room, I could see a headless and skinless human body. The body was devoid of skin and flesh, exposing the muscles and some organs. On the kitchen stove there was a boiling pot. The pot was full of liquid, and on the surface I could identify a skinned human head and a number of cooked vegetables. There were 2 plates served up in the kitchen, as well as 1 plate that had been thrown outside. These plates contained cooked meat, baked potatoes, pumpkin, beetroot, zucchini, cabbage, yellow squash, and gravy. The cooked meat was part of John's body. Katherine had used her slaughterhouse skills to remove all of John's skin in one go. She then cut his head off and began to boil that with vegetables on the stove. She cut off part of his buttocks and cooked that meat and served it up. Next to the 2 plates in the kitchen were name cards, and the names on those were the names of John's 2 children. She planned to feed John unknowingly to his own kids. The 3rd plate that was thrown into the yard is believed to have been for Katherine herself. That she started to eat it and either didn't like it and threw it out, or became horrified as to what she was doing and threw it out. That night, as John slept, Katherine entered the house wearing some lingerie. She woke him up and they had sex, and then John was going back to sleep. While he did so, she used a butcher's knife to stab him. John panicked and tried to run out of the house. He actually made it to the front door and into the front yard, but unfortunately Katherine was close behind chasing him, and she dragged him back into the house. She stabbed him at least 37 times, and John bled to death in his own hallway. When the police arrived that morning, Katherine was still inside the house. She had taken a lot of pills and was in a comatose state. Initially, Katherine tried to plead guilty to a manslaughter charge, but that was denied. So in 2001, she pled not guilty to murder. A trial was going to start and a jury was being chosen, and then Katherine changed her plea to guilty. However, still to this very day, she denies having any memory as to anything that happened after the 2 had sex that night. 2 psych evaluations determined that she has borderline personality disorder. However, she is sane, and she knew what she was doing that day. The justice for the case said the last minute of his life must have been a time of abject terror for him, as they were a time of utter enjoyment for her. She has not expressed any contrition or remorse, and if released, she poses a serious threat to the security of society. He pointed out that the nature of the crime, along with Katherine's lack of remorse, required a severe penalty, and Katherine received something that no woman had ever received in Australia: life without parole. Her paperwork was marked with the words, "Never to be released." 5 years later, Katherine tried to appeal the decision, claiming that no parole was too severe for the murder. The appeal was denied, and she will spend the rest of her life in jail. This case is an important reminder as to the dangers of an abusive relationship. Whether it's a mentally, physically, or sexually abusive relationship, someone that abuses a partner, no matter how apologetic they may be after doing it, will always continue to do it. And typically, the abuse will get more frequent and more severe as the relationship goes. Abusive relationships like this are very well researched in this day and age, and there are a lot of resources available. If you think that you are in an abusive relationship, or someone that you know might be, I will leave the wiki link down below with a lot of hotlines and websites for help depending on your location. Or alternatively, feel free to email me, and depending on the situation and the location, I will help find you the resources available. And let me know what you think on this case. Do you believe that Katherine doesn't remember what she did to John in the early hours of that morning? And why do you think that plate was thrown outside? Did she just not like the taste of the meat, or was she horrified as to what she was doing? She had some kind of moment of clarity. And as always guys, like the video if you liked it, dislike if you didn't, let me know why, and be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon, and stay safe out there. It is a very crazy world.